Hi, writers. Welcome to episode number 37. I'm Rachael Herron, and I'm really glad you're here. Today, our interview is with Kate Maruyama, and I know that you're going to enjoy listening to her. I really love what she said about understanding kind of the why behind our books and the who inside our books. It was just a pleasure to talk to her, and that's going to be great when you get there. Before you get there, I'll give you my little update. It has been a big damn week. It really has. I'm exhausted. Let's see. I had a reading last Friday night at Octopus Literary Salon in Oakland. And it had been a while since I'd given a reading, like a literary reading, and even longer since I'd done it with people that I didn't know. I ended up reading with two amazing writers. It was just 100% enjoyable. I wasn't worried about selling books. I didn't even have any books to bring to the cafe to sell, because most of them are sold, by vendors who are not me. I don't sell my own books. So I just had to go and show up and read, and my sisters came and a bunch of friends came, and it was just pretty delightful. And the next day, on Saturday, I did my class at Stanford, the How to Plot Your Novel class. And like I mentioned, I had not gotten that ready too far ahead of time. Like the next day, I think after I recorded the last podcast, I had taught this material before, but in a longer format. I had never done it in 6 hours. And the classes at Stanford, they require things like, bathroom breaks and lunch breaks. Go figure. So it actually works out to about 5 hours. So it was a super compressed class, a lot of information, and the students were fantastic. I could not have asked for a better class. I'm not quite sure how I keep ending up with these amazing classes and amazing students, but I'm not going to look that particular gift horse in the mouth. I just enjoy it. We all got so much out of the day, and I left completely spent. I had given all I had. I told them all my secrets, all my tips, everything I have learned the hard way about plotting a book. And don't you worry, because I'm going to be making an online class for that. So if you were not available to come to Stanford last Saturday, which aside from 21 of you, that would be the rest of the world, you'll still have a chance to look at that. I'm very proud of that class. So I drove home. I was just super happy and thinking about my writer's newsletter that I was going to send out that night when I got home, talking about the wonder and the joy of being around other writers, especially sometimes I find being around new writers who have these really big questions, these really hard to answer questions. And I get so much pleasure out of saying, oh yes, I screwed that up. Let me tell you how I learned about that. So perhaps you will not make the same mistakes as I have made. And of course, that probably won't work because everybody makes their own mistakes in their own way, in their own time. It's part of the beauty of life. But it is just so enjoyable to do that. So anyway, I drove home and had dinner, and then realized that my little dog, who is sitting here on my lap, this one right here is a very expensive dog right now because she ate a cup full of raisins, and they're toxic to dogs, some dogs, putting them into kidney failure. So I had to take her to the emergency vet that night, and she stayed for 2.5 days. $2,000 later. Holy crap. She's fine, but that was exhausting and remarkably emotionally distressing, I must say. Even though the vet said she'd be fine if she stayed in the hospital and continued to be monitored and was on all the fluids, I didn't quite have the capability of dealing with that very well. So that was rough. Hello, Dozy. And the next day was Stitches West, which is this huge knitting convention where I was doing a signing, and I got to see all of my people, all of my knitters that I've known for so long, and it was wonderful, and it was also just really exhausting. And I actually took Monday off. If you subscribe to my writer's newsletter, you didn't get it this week. And that's actually the point that I want to make, is that sometimes shit happens and it pushes our plans to the side. And as dedicated and as diligent as I am about meeting my word count, about hitting my goals, some weeks we just don't. And I wanted to remind you, if you've forgotten, that it's okay when you have a goal and you don't make it. We are all, if you're listening to this, we are all in the privileged position of having the time and the energy and the desire to create. If you are living a hard scrabble existence and you literally don't know where your next meal is coming from, you're not going to be a writer. You're going to be struggling for survival. None of us have that happening. We think it's a big deal when we miss these goals. It's really not. We just get back up on the horse and start trotting or galloping or whatever it is that horse people do. So yeah, I wanted to say that. It's okay to miss the mark sometimes. It really is. And I don't know if this is related or not, but I'm thinking a lot about how grateful I am for this life that I have, for this life that I've created. I've been studying this thing called effective forecasting for the Patreon essay that I'm writing right now. And basically, effective forecasting shows us that we are terrible as a species at predicting what will make us happy. The things we think will make us really, really happy end up only making us somewhat happy, and then we get used to whatever the situation is. The things that we think will be devastating, that will destroy us, that we can't live through, they hurt, but we get through them, and we end up back at kind of that happy set point that we all have. It's all it's different for everyone, but we end up back at this set point. We are not good at predicting what will make us happy. However, I always thought that writing full-time would make me happy. And kind of knowing this about what we get used to, I was also predicting in this last year to get used to this job, to get used to being happy, maybe to even become a little bit less happy because I finally have what I want and I get used to it. That is not happening. It is so cool. I was leaving Mills this afternoon after writing and looking up at the trees and thinking, God damn, this is my job. I still am not over it. It still delights me every single day that I am allowed to do this. So if you are a Patreon supporter, I want to thank you immensely from the bottom of my heart. I have a couple new ones this week. And I want you just to know and understand, anyone who is supporting me on Patreon, how much that means to me and what a difference your support makes in my life. Sandil, thank you for increasing your pledge. That is huge and wonderful. And Tracy and Rachel, new patrons, thank you so much. It means the world. If you only knew what it meant to me. So, okay, that's my update. Let us jump into the interview. I hope that your work is going well. I hope that if you've missed a mark or two this week, that you just put it out of your head. That is done. It's over. Write tonight. Write tomorrow morning. Write your heart and write for your life. Okay? It's good chatting with you. I'll talk to you soon. Enjoy the interview. I am so pleased today to welcome Kate Maruyama. Hi, Kate.
Hi, how are you?
I'm so glad that you're here. Of course. Let me give you a quick little introduction for those who might not know you. Kate Maruyama's novel Harrowgate, which incidentally I am really looking forward to reading. It looks like it is right up my alley, was published by 47 North. Her short work has appeared in Arcadia, Stoneboat and Controlled Burn, and is now featured in 2 new anthologies, Phantasma Stories and Winter Horror Tales, as well as on the Rumpus, Salon and The Citron Review, among other journals. She teaches at Antioch University Los Angeles in the BA and MFA Programs, and for inspirationtopublication.com, as well as for writing workshops of Los Angeles. She writes, teaches, that's a lot. She writes, teaches, cooks, and eats in Los Angeles, where she lives with her family. I really like the cooking and eating part. That's one of my favorite.
Well, it's kind of central to Los Angeles, so it works out.
Yes. We have the Oakland connection up here. There's a lot of cooking and a lot of eating. going on. Yeah.
One would hope in any good city there is a lot of cooking and eating going on.
I would be very disappointed if that were untrue, in fact.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, I was doing a little research on you, and I was looking up some of your essays, and I have to say that I really enjoyed your essay, and listeners, I will link it in the show notes. It was on women who submit lit, and it was the saying yes while afraid piece, and in there you talked about racking up multiple rejections after rejections while you kept pressing forward in order to get your first publication. And there was a line in it that really resonated with me. Saying yes while afraid is now my modus operandi. And I have to say that is my MO too. That is, I'm normally saying yes and then immediately saying, holy shit,
what did I just say yes to?
What did I just do? Why did they believe me? Why did they think I could do this? So hearing that.
And if it's far enough away, it doesn't seem scary at all. And then it only scares you when it's too late to back out.
And then you hate yourself for saying yes. And then you do it and you have a great time and life goes on. And I like it when I hear other people having that same idea in mind. So this podcast is all about process and your process, and I would love to dive deep into that for a few moments. What is the best time of day for you to write, and where do you write?
Well, I've got 2 kids and 4 jobs, so I try to sit down. Morning is usually my most fruitful time, and I try to sit down at least 3 times a week for about 3 hours at a time when I can. That said, there are things like summer and Christmas break where I don't get as much done as I would like to.
Those 3 hours, are they pretty much uninterrupted when you get them, when you can fit them in?
I make them so. The one good thing the kids were good for is that any time I spent writing felt like stolen time. And so it seems more like an evil treat that I'm, taking part in, and I just shut everybody else out. And so, yeah, it's pretty much uninterrupted.
I have noticed that from others, though. It's in order to fit it in, it feels like a treat. Whereas I don't have kids, and sometimes it almost feels like a punishment. I have to go write. Whereas really busy moms are like, I get to write.
And it was when they were very small. They're teenagers now, so it's very different. But when they were very small, it was the only time that I could sort of, get inside my head, talk to grown-ups for a while. I'll be they fictional.
Even though you were making them up, yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. And how do you write? Are you longhand on the computer?
My handwriting is appalling. So I'm on the computer. The only time I write longhand is if I'm stuck and have an idea, or when I teach writing in a workshop format. If I give my students an exercise, I'll apply that exercise to whatever I'm working on. And I'll write longhand there. And it's very funny. It's a bit like untangling a drunken phone call from someone the next day. I mean, I think it becomes an art in and of itself what ends up like coming off the page, because some of it cannot be relied on, But yeah, but mostly computer and just Word. I know there are a lot of different softwares out there that really help people. I have friends who swear by Scrivener, but I've been doing this for a long time, years, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I love it. How do you refill the creative well when you're running dry?
I don't really. It's terrible to say I don't run dry, because I know people. That my walls are different. I have little nervous breakdowns in the middle of working on something, but dry is not really something that happens. After I finish a book, I will, to come up with an idea for a new book. Short stories aren't that hard to step into. I'll go for long walks and things and sort of try to tease it out that way. As far as feeding the creative well, which I think is different, I love visual art. My husband's a visual artist, so we go to a lot of exhibits and stuff. And just going out and seeing people and having real conversations is also, very good for writers to do once in a while.
I love the differentiation that you make in there. The instead of running all the way dry, you're constantly feeding it and putting into it so that you don't run out.
Yeah, and it's not important. Like I'm, constantly brimming with ideas, but the idea of sitting down and saying, I don't know what to write about, is I think that's somewhere back in my 20s. It doesn't really happen anymore.
Yeah.
I think life gets more interesting and complex as you get older, so there's always something you can be asking
Always.
the world.
Always. Yes.
Yeah.
And what is the worst writing advice you've ever been given?
Um, Gosh, I blow it off when it happens, so
Yeah. Well,
I
that's
don't
good. You don't
record
internalize
it.
it.
But I did have, someone suggest that I should not do present tense for a book that was clearly speaking to me in present tense. But I think when people give that kind of advice, they have stuff stuck in their mind about what writing should be. And it's like when I talk to my students, I tell writers that give them the same advice I give expectant mothers. Listen, nod politely, take what's useful, and walk away. And just
Oh,
say
I
thank
love
you.
that. What
Thank you.
good advice.
Yeah, because it's, every piece you work on is different. Everybody's approach and technique is different.
And arguing with that person is not going to get much.
It doesn't get you anywhere, I can tell you that much.
It's like politics. You just,
They would tell you should definitely never let your children play in the dirt, and they could go on all day about it, but it's not going to help your kid or you.
Oh, and that's exactly why I asked this question, because I want listeners to be able to hear that in their head. Oh my gosh, I was told I shouldn't use first person, but maybe that's not true. I want to shake that kind of thing up. So thank you for saying that.
And there are a lot of teachers who kind of get stuck on one thing. And I had an excellent mentor who was stuck on never ever use adverbs. And I can understand that it's always good to find the right verb, but
Yes.
there are always exceptions to everything that things that people get stuck on like that.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. What secret writing tip of awesomeness have you discovered the hard way?
That's so funny. You had two questions that the hard way, right? So that one was getting stuck in the middle, which always happens. And I used to write screenplays, and I would have this nervous breakdown. It's all for crap. This is totally not worth anything. Why am I even writing it? And about the third time that happened, my husband said, "Yeah, this happens every time, and in about 2 weeks it'll be over." Just so you know, like he had to recognize that pattern. So once I recognized it, the middle, I realize now when I'm in it, and it's much worse for books because books are very complex, and they really don't take form until you're through a first draft. I know enough to tell myself to shut up and just keep poking it with a stick,
I get that right around 40 to 45,000 words on a book every single time. But I never believe my wife when she tells me that it's been this bad before. I always insist, like, no, it's never been this bad. And this time I mean it. Yeah. And I love that your husband actually has like a date for you to get better. He's like looking at the calendar.
I think it was about 2 weeks to a month with screenplays. It definitely sometimes takes longer with a book. But what I'll do is I'll go off and write something different for a while and just give it a rest and then come back. And usually when I read it, it's not as crappy as I remembered it was.
It never is. It never. Thank God. Can you give us a quick craft tip of any sort?
Yes, this one was really good, and I actually got it from a lecture someone gave at my school. But what I tell my students is, if you in your head can imagine in your book or story who's telling the story, which I hope you have in mind, who they're telling the story to, how long ago the story happened, and why they're telling it now. It's not that a fiction story gets told to someone, but Juliana Baggett said of the book Pure that she wrote it as if she was pulling her best friend close and speaking very urgently. So if you think of your narrator, even if it's an omniscient narrator, who they're talking to, I've argued to my class that in The Great Gatsby, Nick Carraway is probably talking to someone who he has to explain the upper class to. And he might be telling them the story in a bar. It has sort of that feeling about it. And it's not that Fitzgerald sat down and thought that, but I know that when you are writing, it helps to have those things in mind.
That's huge.
And it leads to sort of voice, it leads to stronger point of view, and it lets your reader feel like they're in really good hands from early on.
I love that. I always think of writing to a particular reader, your perfect reader.
Right.
But that's completely different. That's giving a reason for it. And I'm absolutely...
Once you start getting reviews, you don't want to pretend you're writing to a reader because they start getting grumpy in your head, and that's hard.
That's true.
Yeah, I try to think more of who the narrator's talking to.
I love that. I'm going to use that for my next book. That's fantastic, which I just started.
Oh,
so I'm going to think about it tomorrow.
Yeah,
when I sit
and
down.
it's something, it's something you don't have to answer on the page. You just kind of answer it to yourself.
I'm sure it's probably better not to ever answer that, but to know it.
Yeah.
Thank you. On really bad days when you couldn't write or teach, what other profession do you wish you had?
See, I don't know. I love teaching so much. I can do other things than I have, but I always think when things are getting challenging money-wise, wouldn't mind going back to waiting tables, wouldn't mind doing the barista thing. But I don't really long after any profession I don't have, which I think is a point of privilege to be at, for sure.
I worked 911 for a long time before I went full-time writing, and 911 was never as challenging as waitressing was. Waitressing, I think, was one of the hardest, most body and mind taking up job I've ever had. Just
it's really
all
exhausting.
capacities working at top level.
Yeah, and you also, it's good, it's good training for a writer. I don't know if I'd have any energy to write if I was doing it while writing. But in reading people, in figuring out what they need, you have to practice deep empathy. Sometimes there are people who don't want to be bugged. They do not want you to come back and check on how their silverware is doing, and other people really actually kind of need someone to talk to. So it was good training for that.
I've never heard anybody else say that.
What?
I've never heard anybody else say that. I've always said that about waitressing, and I've never heard anybody say it as clearly as that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And it was really good training. I worked in Hollywood after in sort of taking a ration of shit and doing it with a smile because it will affect everything. So that part was useful. I'm fortunately at a place in my life where I don't have to have that kind of encounter anymore. But
I know, me too, and I love it. It's the best part.
Yeah.
If you were starting all over as a new writer now, what advice would you give a baby Kate writer?
I tell me to write a lot more and to know that it's going to be crap for a while. I think I had this notion that when I sat down to write, it had to be coming out good or it wasn't good at all. And that would lead to not writing. I did a lot of that in my 20s. So I think now I would just say write and keep writing and write only for yourself. And then when you have stuff down, start, revising it and making it worthy of an audience.
Excellent. Excellent advice. And what would you like to plug right now? What would you like to tell us about?
Well, Inspiration to Publication is an online program that I teach with, and if you have a computer, you can take 2 to 4 week classes from anywhere in the world at any time of day. So I would definitely look that up.
I will link to that, yeah.
And I do book coaching through that too, which isn't really book coaching. It's actually sort of writing coaching if anybody is working on short stories or fiction. And we have some fantastic coaches who will work with you on memoir, essay, poetry. Sochi is our new poetry book coach, which is lovely.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah. And then, I would definitely plug going and talking to all of your Congress people now about things that concern you. How's that?
I love that as a plug. That's basically, I've got social action on my bullet journal, my to-do list now every day. And I just cross it off. I do my words. I call a senator, a representative.
Yeah,
and
it's part of the workday.
It has to be now.
I've started. The noise got really loud from the news, and I was realizing the writing. There were no quiet spaces anymore. So I decided to. I'm basically a 2 o'clock activist. I'll start reading the news and chiming in and figuring out who to call and write then. And I'm trying really hard not to read the news first thing in the morning.
Me too.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm in a terrific mood today because I still haven't looked at the news.
Right, and we can't give all of our energy to that every morning, or
we can't.
The stuff doesn't get written, and I think this stuff is kind of important.
I absolutely agree, and I'm with you. I start looking around 3 or 4 when my work is winding up, and then my new rule is I don't let myself look at any social media at all in bed, because I always used to like to read Twitter right before I went to sleep,
and now you get wound up. You
so wound up. Yeah. Yes.
Instagram is still kind of a safe place.
Even if it's
what I mean by safe is, obviously people still should register their political opinions everywhere and share articles, but I don't feel that urgency if I'm not doing anything that you would feel in bed looking at. Twitter and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I like to see the social activity on that, but then also mixed with cat pictures and
Yeah.
and knitting and
How are people's gardens growing? I'd
muffins.
like to know.
Yes, I really do like to know. Well, Kate, it has been such a treat to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us and talking to the listeners.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for having me on.
Okay, I hope you get some writing done soon. Nice
Okay,
big 3 hour spank. Okay, bye.
Okay, thanks. Bye.